about morality, which I try to sneakily keep out of the title, because when you title something with morality, nobody shows up. So I try to make like a slightly sexier title. But it's such a rich topic, and hopefully I want to sell you tonight on why it's a rich topic. And so we're going to look at well, let me say this. I was trying to I was looking at the morality systems of Nagarjuna, of Patanjali, and St. Teresa of Avila, and particularly I was looking at St. Teresa has what's called the Teresan triad, which is the three qualities she considers to be the most important of the spiritual life. And then I was looking at Nagarjuna has in his text called Letter to a Friend, he has 9 things that are the most detrimental to the spiritual life, 9 things to avoid at all costs. And then I was looking at Patanjali, and he lists the 2 most important practices for a spiritual life to succeed. So I was just looking at all these, and I was trying to figure out, well, how could I go about talking about these? Could I compare and contrast them, or what would be an interesting, what's a way to tie these 3 totally different systems together? And then just to make it more complex, I decided to throw in St. John of the Cross, and then a beautiful Hindu text called the Vairagya Satakam. And so we're going to look at all 5 of these actually. And I realized that there's one quality that ties them all together. And that's the quality I want to talk about tonight. Any guesses on what that quality might be? I mean, we just mentioned a bunch of different things. What might be one thing that ties in all of those 3 things together? Any ideas? Becca, is that a hand raise or just a finger up? Okay. Okay. All right. Good. Pensive away. Anybody? What do you think?
Oneness.
Oneness. Yeah. What, Larry?
Choice.
Choice. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Choice. What else? What would be? Yeah. Go ahead. Compassion. Yeah. That seems that would be a good one, right? Yeah.
Intention.
Intention. Yeah. Yeah. Those are all good. I'm trying to think of. Well, it turned out to be renunciation. But renunciation was the thing that tied them all together. All 3 and all 5 of those different systems are based on renunciation. The renunciation is like this master key that ties them all together. So what I want to do tonight is I want to do 3 things. And I just found out we're going to 9 o'clock. For some reason I thought it was 9:30. So I'm going to...
You can go to 9:30.
No, we'll go to... I'll try to end around 9 o'clock. I know you all are busy, and Shauna's already threatened me if I don't end by that time. She's going to cause a ruckus. And we'll take a little break too if it starts to get. If I see more than 3 people asleep, I'll make sure to take a break. So, so what I want to talk about is I want to talk what is renunciation first of all, and then how does one develop it, and then so what is renunciation? The benefits of renunciation. Why would modern day people like us care about renunciation? And then 3rd thing is how to develop renunciation. So that's the idea. And first I want to give you a quick introduction to the text we're going to be talking about. The first one is from Nagarjuna. And it's called Letter to a Friend. Nagarjuna is this mysterious character. You see him in Tankas a lot. He's always got snakes, like a hood of snakes over him. And Naga is a type of being, a type of non-human being that most of us don't believe in. That like they live underground and underwater, and they protect sacred scripture. I think of them as like the dragons in the caves hoarding, gold. Nagas are like they hoard scripture. And Nagarjuna supposedly made contact with these beings, and they taught him all of these sacred scriptures. He was around 150 to 250 CE, but he keeps popping in and out of Indian history throughout a rather large period of time, so nobody knows for sure. But I'm always interested in what's happening in the world when these people are around, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of that to give it some context. So around the same time as Nagarjuna, you have the Neoplatonists are really big, and they're Platonius is he just has written a bunch of work, and he's gaining momentum in Greece. You have Alexandria is the biggest intellectual center in the world in Egypt. So all of this stuff is happening around the time of Nagarjuna. Platonius has had a strong influence on Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam. So you already have a lot of intermingling between those three faiths. So that's the first text we're going to look at. He wrote it to a king, which is why we have king in the title of this talk tonight. And he wrote it to a king and advices on how to rule, how a busy person with very little free time could live a spiritual life. So it's a relevant topic for us. Well, it's a relevant topic for you all. I'm presently unemployed, so I have a little more time than you all have. But so the second one we're going to look at is Patanjali, and he wrote a text called the Yoga Sutras, which most of you are familiar with, I imagine, or you've heard of it. And Patanjali's dates are anywhere between 200 BC and 200 AD. And people debate on what that is. I like, but we can put him if we want, since find the median, around the time of Christ. And he's considered, you know, the godfather of yoga, although he didn't talk about asana so much, yoga practices. He talked about yoga philosophy. So we're going to look at his text a little bit. And then we're going to look at St. Teresa's The Way of Perfection. And so what's happening, and then we're also going to look at John of the Cross, the ascent of Mount Carmel. And so what's going on, St. Teresa and St. John were very close friends. You could almost think of them as spiritual partners. St. Teresa realized that St. John was the real crucial key to her getting her monasteries going. She needed an ordained friar, and he was the one, and they became very close confidants with each other. So what was happening when they were around? Well, Da Vinci, Kabir, and Columbus all just recently passed away. We have Mirabai, those of you that know Mirabai, Queen Elizabeth, Michelangelo, Guru Nanak Dev, who was the founder of the Sikh religion. They were all alive at this time. We have Lobsang Chuki Gelsen, for those of you that know him, Shakespeare, and Galileo. So it was a pretty interesting time to be alive, and that's where you find St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross. So those are the three, basically the four main texts we're going to look at. And then I'm going to introduce you today to a beautiful text called the Vairagya Satakam. And it was written by a man named Pratyahari, who we know very little about. And that was written in the 5th century. So what was happening in the 5th century? You have St. Augustine, the fall of the Roman Empire. St. Augustine wrote an epic book, which Jim Curry kindly sent to me. It's a book this big, and he wrote called The City of God, and it's a defense for Christianity against the Goths who sacked Rome. So that was all going on around this time. And then you have Ishvara Krishna, who wrote one of the most foundational texts of Samkhya philosophy, was also published in this. Now I know this is not all interesting to all of you, but hopefully some of you it's interesting just to get a context of what we're talking about with each of these texts. So let me start with a quote. In enjoyment there is fear of disease. In social position, the fear of falling. In wealth, the fear of hostile takeovers. In honor, there is the fear of public humiliation. In power, there is the fear of enemies. In beauty, the fear of old age. In scriptural knowledge, the fear of others more scripturally knowledgeable. In virtue, the fear of jealous opponents. In body, the fear of pain and death. All the things of this world pertaining to human beings are attended with fear. Renunciation alone supports fearlessness in this transient world. Beautiful, right? I mean, it's exquisite. That's from the Vairagya Satakam. Satakam means 100 verses of Vairagya. We'll talk about vairagya in a minute. Renunciation alone supports fearlessness in this transient world. So that could be enough of a selling point, really, for renunciation. Because can anybody really disagree with some of those things? Watch it in your own life. The minute you get something you want, the mind shifts almost instantaneously. The minute you have it, the mind shifts so quickly that you don't notice it to the preservation of that thing you wanted. You see what I mean? So we think there's going to be a moment where anxiety and fear will be relieved. But that moment actually doesn't exist. It's a fiction. There's no such thing. You want a certain position in your job. The moment you get it, instantaneously you're worried about losing it. That's a fear you didn't have a moment ago, right? The moment before you got that position, you didn't have the fear of losing it. You just have the fear of not getting the position. And then the moment you get the position, you have the fear of losing it. We are, as human beings, we are united as a species in that we all share this common problem. And we keep working out the details, trying to figure it out. Well, if I just give myself enough of a buffer and make myself more superior to my workmates, I'll never lose the position. Or, you know, the mind starts trying to figure out how to work out the details to be rid of fear and anxiety. But I'm proposing that's an illusion, that will never happen. That it's just simply one character being taken over for another character. So, so what is renunciation? Throw out some words that come to your mind. Just the first word that comes to your mind when I say renunciation. What do you think of?
Non-attachment.
Non-attachment.
Letting go.
Letting go.
Getting your ass kicked.
You're getting your ass kicked.
Giving up.
Giving up.
Rejection.
Rejection.
Hopelessness with worldly things.
What'd you say?
Hopelessness with worldly things.
Hopelessness with worldly things. Yeah. What else?
Powerlessness.
Powerlessness. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Loss of will.
Loss of will.
Really?
Relief. Oh, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Death.
Freedom.
Death, freedom. That's very interesting. Relief, death, freedom. Somebody would have no idea what we're talking about. Right? What else?
Turning away from what you thought was.
Yeah.
So it's like being touching the tip of the trampoline.
Yeah.
Projected away from it, like magnets.
Yeah, like a projection away from the madness. Yeah. That's beautiful. One of my favorite definitions that secular definitions that I heard was my friend Vicky. I said, "What's the first thing you think of when you think of renunciation?" And she said, "Giving up things which are fun." And I think many of us, if I would say, would anybody like to renounce something for the rest of their life? Most of us would be like, no, thank you. It's not something we immediately run to. We don't think of like renunciation as a pleasant thing necessarily. And I'm pretty sure that a few of you at least wouldn't be here tonight if I titled this talk, why to renounce things, or or renunciation is good for you, or something like that. So Saint Teresa has a beautiful definition of renunciation. She says, not paying close attention to that which doesn't bring us closer to God. Not paying close attention to what doesn't bring us closer to God. So I want to reword that and take the God out of it, because we probably have some atheists and Buddhists lurking among us. So I would say that you can also say, with her definition, you could say, the active process of opening up to greater and greater levels of joy. Now that seems like for a moment, that seems like two slightly different things, but let's look at it for a moment. Because what happens if you don't pay close attention to everything that is not God? Right? I mean, in a sense, God is... I don't know how you answer that. At least we can say God is equated with something beautiful, right? We can say God is usually equated with some kind of beauty an inarticulable beauty. So turning our attention away from all of that which is not God would be, in fact, wouldn't it not, turning our attention to everything that is God, right? Which we could also say is the active process of opening up to greater and greater experiences of joy. Anybody vehemently disagree at this point? So, and almost disagree.
Needs some clarification.
It's clarification. Yeah. So, well, let's look at, so we'll come back to that, but let's look at a couple different definitions and see if we can kind of hone in on it. Let me just read a couple of different quotes, and then C.S. Lewis, in a letter to B. Griffiths, says this. He says, "All the beauty in nature withers when we try to make it an absolute. Put first things first, and we get second things thrown in. Put second things first, and we lose both first and second things. We never get, say, even the sensual pleasure of food at its best when we are being greedy." So C.S. Lewis is talking about first and second things, right? First things he is equating with virtue, and second things he's equating with sensual pleasure. Right? So he says, for example, the first thing of compassion or of generosity brings the second thing automatically of the sensual delight of food, for example. But if we just focus on the sensual delight of food, we oftentimes lose both the sensual experience and the feeling of compassion. So St. Catherine of Siena says, "The heart cannot be given over wholly to God unless it first be set free from every other love." So we get this a lot. You can't serve two masters, right? You're either serving the world or you're serving your spiritual life. The heart cannot be given over wholly to God unless it first be set free from every other love. St. Francis of Assisi, it's rule number 16 of his rule. "A man is really clean of heart when he has no time for the things of this world, but is always searching for the things of heaven." Again, similar to St. Catherine, right? A similar vein. And then from Patanjali Rinpoche, "And so, my friends, my beloved ones, let us not be deceived by the shining promises of this life. Chop it off and throw it away in this instant right now." Again, right, there's a same theme there. "And so, my friends, my beloved ones, let us not be deceived by the shining promises of this life. Chop it off and throw it away in this instant." That's from his book, Stairway to Heaven, which of course is what the song is named after. Oh, it wasn't. And then Patanjali Rinpoche, who was one of my heroes, he was a wanderer. And sometimes he'd give Dharma talks just from his horse. He wouldn't even bother getting off the horse. He'd come through a town and just, he's like a wild man just yelling the Dharma to anybody who wanted to listen. But he wrote a great long poem called "Advice from Me to Myself," where he berates himself for all of his small-mindedness. And he says this, which felt pretty much like he was speaking to me. He says, "Your mind is spinning around about carrying out a lot of useless projects. It's a waste. Give it up. Thinking about the 100 plans you want to accomplish with never enough time to finish them just weighs down your mind. You're completely distracted by all these projects, which never come to an end, which never seem to come to an end, but keep spreading out more and more and more like ripples in a water. Don't be a fool for once, just sit tight." I recently just did a long retreat, and I thought I read this once a month, and it was, it's such great advice. Because when you're in a long retreat, what you do is you get rid of all of the external distractions. Like you don't have anywhere to spend money, which turns out is a hard thing. Like consumerism is something we maybe don't even think about. But when you buy something at a store, there's some feeling of a sense of self that you get every time you buy even a pack of Tic Tacs, And when that's removed, there starts to become an anxiety. And so in a long retreat, you remove external obstacles to being quiet, but it turns out you can create unlimited amounts of internal obstacles, internal trivia to keep yourself busy. And so that becomes really a much harder fight to do. It's very hard to just sit tight. It's so easy to come up with projects and things like that. And if you ever do a retreat, I strongly recommend you don't give in to that. Sitting tight is the most beautiful thing you can do, and it is the hardest thing to do. And then we have from St. John of the Cross in his book Ascent, he says, "Since the things of the world cannot enter the soul, they are not in themselves an encumbrance or harm to it. Rather, it is the will and appetite dwelling within that causes the damage." And that shows me that's somebody who really understands retreat, right? Because he says, since the things of the world cannot enter the soul, they are not in and of themselves an encumbrance. Which means that money, that having a good job is not an obstacle to a spiritual life, for example. Having a fixation with nice cars is not an obstacle to the spiritual life. You see what I mean? Having a family is not an obstacle to the spiritual life, because they are not in and of themselves an encumbrance. It is the will and the appetite dwelling within that causes the damage. So are you harming yourself and others with your obsession for money? And that's where the damage comes in. If you know much St. John of the Cross, he's very unrelenting. I think he's the biggest hard ass in all of spiritual saints. He's brutal. And this feels like such a generous statement of his, so I really love it. And then Mahatma Gandhiji, only by renouncing the world can one enjoy it. So we get a sense, right? We have hopefully there's a dichotomy that's been set up between the worldly life and the life of the attachment to worldly life and the life of renunciation to worldly life. So if we come back to the idea that renunciation, right, St. Teresa, not paying close attention to everything that doesn't bring us closer to God. Not paying close attention to that which does not bring us closer to God. And many of you have vows, actually, if you have taken Bodhisattva vows, you have a vow not to waste your time on things that don't bring you closer to God in a way. You have a vow not to waste your time on things that don't ultimately work to open the heart. And then, so my definition, again, the active process of opening up to greater and greater levels of joy. So, the reason I'm proposing this as a definition for renunciation is because I'm proposing that the more we can give up fixation on worldly things, the more our heart becomes free and open. And as we see in Vairagyam Satyakam, it's fearlessness is what arises. So let's look a little bit, any thoughts, any questions, confusions at this point? Let's look at where this comes up in each of these three texts of Nagarjuna, Patanjali, and Teresa. The first one is we'll look at is Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, chapter 1, verse 12. Abhyasa vairagya bhyam tani rodaha. So the state of a yoga is attained through a balance between abhyasa. What's abhyasa? Anybody know? Abhyasa is practice, and vairagya. What's vairagya?
Dispassion.
Yeah, dispassion, and often translated as renunciation. So Patanjali is saying that yoga is attained through two things. There's two essential aspects to having a successful yoga practice. There's practice, and there's renunciation, dispassion. Vairagya, the word vairagya comes from we can break it down to two words. V, which means without. And what does raga mean? Yeah, what'd you say? Yeah, attachment. It also means, raga, and like raga in music, right? If you play a raga, it can mean passion. It can also mean like feeling or emotion. So it's without passion, which doesn't sound very pleasant, right? If I would say, let's do practices which will bring us less passion. But if there's another way of looking at it, from the root ranj, which means to color. And so we can say vairagya is, in this context, in verse 12, it's more accurately defined as to be engaged but uncolored by the world. To be engaged but uncolored by the world. So what would it mean to be engaged and colored by the world? Let's take an example. What would it mean to be, if somebody yells at you while you're walking around the streets and they come and start yelling at you, what would it mean to be colored by that situation?
Be conditioned.
What's that?
To be conditioned, to be reactive.
Yeah.
To train to defend yourself.
Yeah.
To react defensively.
Yeah, reactive is a great word. Yeah, to be reactive. Right? Somebody yells at you, you're reactive to that. Don't yell at me. So in this, it's right. It's to engage in the world, but not to be reactive. And we're going to talk a little bit about trying to dismantle reactive patterns. But let's look at how Nagarjuna talks about this. So Nagarjuna, in Letter to a Friend, he says, I said earlier 9, I meant 5. 5 obstacles, right, to your 5 obstacles that you should avoid at all costs in your spiritual life. So let's see if we can guess a few of them. What are some of the obstacles to avoid at all costs? First I'll give you one so you get a sense of how he's talking about it. He says, the mental scattering that comes as a result of regret and nostalgia. The mental scattering that comes as a result of regret and nostalgia. So in retreat, I had, and I know some other people had, Annie had too, something that comes up. I don't know how long it took for it to come up. It took about a year for incredible regret to come up. Like unbelievable regret. I thought I went into retreat with a fairly clean palette, you know? I didn't have anything really intense going on. But man, as soon as the mind quiets down, you remember everything. And it's so painful. For me, it was so painful, all these little things that I had forgotten. I was talking with some friends the other day, and I was saying I remembered something I had never remembered before. I call it a foundation memory. Something I had never replayed after the event passed. And it was calling a little girl in 3rd grade fat, you know? And I was like, it just, right? So I called her fat in 3rd grade. And then I never remembered it. I never replayed it, right? That was over. And 3rd grade was pretty far back, right? And so there I am sitting in meditation. All of a sudden, I can remember exactly where I'm standing in the hall when I called her fat. You know? And the reason I called her fat was, I could play the whole scene. I could look at the reason I called her fat. I remembered the whole scenario. But most intensely, I remember this look on her face as I called her fat. So that's amazing. That's fascinating. Because that means that has lived in my body for all of these years. Right? How old are you in 3rd grade?
9.
8 or 9. I'm 43 now. Anybody good at math? How long ago was that? 30 what? 35 years ago, right? That's a long time for something to be sitting in the body. Where was that? You know?
It's an imprint.
Yeah, it's an imprint. Maybe it was imprinted on my liver or something. And as the purification, and that's what purification is. And it's the same with. Yeah. A purification of the mind is the same as purification of the body. When you purify the body, right, you have toxins come out. When you purify the mind, you have toxins come out. How do you purify the body? What's one way? One way is to fast, right? Is to not put anything into the body. To sit tight. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to have memorized anything. You just have to sit tight and don't eat, and it'll purify the body, right? It turns out it's the same with the mind, which is nice to know because I trained so hard to do retreat, and then when I got into retreat, I found out you actually don't need to know anything. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to have all your practices memorized. You just have to sit tight and let the process purify itself. It's the same process as composting, right? You get a big compost bin, you pour in all this stuff, and then you just let it sit. And heat builds up, and it purifies it and turns it into beautiful, luminous earth, right? So, as I sat tight, I remembered I called this girl fat, you know? And it's just, it's heartbreaking, right? All the things in our body, all the imprints in our minds, all these little things are still in you. Every single image you've ever put into your mind is still there. Every single little thought you've ever put into your mind, it's still there. And it's influencing. I believe it's influencing your physical body as well as your mental body, your pranic body. So Nagarjuna's first thing he says, be careful of. He says, be careful of the mental scattering that comes from regret and nostalgia. And you can fall deep into both of those in a retreat, right? We can fall deep into both of those in our day-to-day life. Like watch your mind, and you'll often find you're on something nostalgic, thinking about the past, or some anger about the past, or anticipation of the future. I had a great home for a while in Alabama. My friend Sten's been there. And we had, I don't know if you remember, but there was a speed bump out front that wasn't colored. So you couldn't see it, right? So cars would come flying over it and they would bottom out. And so, you know, all throughout the day you hear, you hear the car like bottom out. So I thought, you know, it was driving me crazy for a while, and I thought, why not use that for something? So I decided every time I heard a car bottom out, I would try to think, I would just see where my mind was at, you know? It's a great practice. If you have something that occurs every now and then in your day, use it and just use it to reflect, oh, what am I thinking about right now, you know? And often it's some kind of like nostalgia, or some, you know, the good old days, or some kind of like anger or irritability. It's you know, something in front of you or behind you that the mind is fixating on. So that's the first one that Nagarjuna says, be careful of, right? Be careful of this. So let's throw out some other things. What would be obstacles to the spiritual life? Let's see if we can just happen upon the next four at all.
Alcohol.
Alcohol, yeah. That would. And what's the obstacle of alcohol?
Dulls the senses.
Beautiful. Number. I wish we had prizes. Number 3. Nagarjuna's number 3. Dullness. What else? So we got scattering the mind. We have dullness. What else?
Anger?
Yes. Number 2. Malice and blame. Who said anger? Yeah, I have to. Yeah. So yeah, beautiful. God. All right. Let's see. Let's go for 5. So we have mental scattering, malice and blame, dullness and sleepiness. What else?
Agitation.
He doesn't have it, but that's certainly a good one. What else? Agitation. What other classic? You know.
Projecting to the future.
Yeah, anticipation of the future.
Desire.
Desire. Yeah. Both of those. Laziness.
Lethargy.
Lethargy.
Laxity.
Yeah, all of those I think would come slightly under dullness. But yeah, those are all similar. So he has the other one is doubt. And doubt's heavy, right? I mean, if you don't know about doubt so much until you really dedicate to one path.
Yeah.
And then it comes in pretty strong, you know? Or until you dedicate to one person. I know some people, I've had some friends that are just recently married, and you know, there's that moment, you know, like, holy shit, what am I about to do? Like, is this a mistake? Or, you know, it's like, so as soon as you commit to one person, doubt comes in. As soon as you commit to a path, doubt comes in. As soon as you take vows of any kind, doubt sets in pretty heavily. And then the last one is attachment, which What's the opposite of attachment?
Non-attachment?
Yeah, non-attachment. So, and that's what we're looking at. We're looking at renunciation. So that's his. That's how he hones in on renunciation, to be unattached. Now, what I like to do is I like to switch things around and look at the positive. So let's take a moment and look at the positive of all those 5 things. So these would be things you need to develop on the spiritual life. For scattering, the first one would be simplify your life, right? Because the opposite would be the mind that's distracted and scattered. And for this, I encourage people to throw out basically half of everything you own. When I went into retreat, when we went into retreat, we threw out a lot of stuff. And actually, my partner Ann here, we had a big bonfire. And Noreen was there, and we took all of her stuff and we just burned it. Do you remember that? It was absurd. It was like the day before we went into retreat. We were all so hectic and stressed out. And it was in the middle of the day, and we just had a big bonfire, and we just threw things in there. So what better fun thing to do in the middle of Manhattan than start a big bonfire and just throw things in, you know? No, but simplify your life. Just any little ways of simplifying your life. One really fun way to do this is take like a month and try to give one thing from your house away every single day. It's a nice way to get rid of your stuff because you can pawn it on other people and then they have the problems of dealing with it. But yeah, so take one thing out of your house every day as you're about to leave your house and try to give it away to somebody. So the other one, malice. To me, the most powerful tool to get rid of anger and malice is to practice forgiveness. Every day, practice forgiveness. And this is incredibly difficult. A friend of mine was just telling me yesterday that he went through an Easy Pass thing, and his Easy Pass had expired, and they pulled him over, and he said the woman came in and ripped the Easy Pass off of his windshield, but he was on a road trip, so he's like, I'll just call in and I'll use my credit card and refill it, right? But when she ripped it off, he couldn't do that. I don't know how Easy Passes work. You guys probably know. But so he was so mad, and when he was relaying the story, he was so pissed off. Like you could see, just in the replaying of the story, he was going through all of those same toxic emotions, right? And how many times do we replay those stories and just infuse our body with toxicity? So just by a concerted daily effort to forgive the woman that pulled your Easy Pass out of your car, right? I mean, it's, those kinds of things. And what are you doing in that moment? You are doing a spiritual practice, right? In that moment, you are doing your sadhana. You're doing your spiritual practice. As you tried to forgive this strange woman, who was probably having a hell of a day from her side too, right? I mean, what a job to be pulling people over for Easy Pass violations. So forgiveness. And then for dullness, it's just, I want to propose it, the positive aspect of that is to start feeling things, which I think is an incredibly radical practice, is to start feeling things. Because we, our capacity to feel in this culture is partially atrophied by the overload of stimulation that we get. I mean, just walking around the city, how can you feel the amount of pain that's existing, right? That you see around you every day. For me, I'm not so protected from it because I don't live here. So I come into the city and you catch eyes with people and you see so much pain, right? So what is it? Doesn't it seem like to feel that pain would actually weigh you down? Doesn't it seem like that would cause more suffering? So we block ourselves, right? So and then dullness ensues. So if you're finding in your meditation practice or you're dealing with dullness, I invite you to experiment a little bit with trying to feel things. How do you try to feel things? Take 1 minute a day to sit there and just to feel. It's a weird practice, right? So let's try it. We'll do 60 seconds of just trying to feel Now what I want you to do is just feel, how am I feeling? What is going on in me emotionally? That's what I want you just to ask you. Where is tension in my body? Is there tension in my body? Is there no tension in my body? Just all you're trying to do is feel what's happening. Okay. Does anybody want to share anything they just felt? Anybody? What did you feel? Just throw out single words. Anything that came up.
Safe.
Safe. What else?
Fear.
Fear.
Helpless.
What's that?
Helpless.
Helplessness. What else?
Anxiety.
Anxiety.
An impulse to protect.
That's interesting. Impulse to protect.
Like it's self from harm.
Self-protection. What else?
Relief with the issue.
Relief at the so a physical. Well, so a feeling of, and this is what's interesting, and this is a valuable thing. So let's go back in, and what I want you to do is I want you to feel physical sensations and try not to label them. So just feel whatever physically is happening in your body. We'll do this for 1 minute. Okay, what did you feel? Throw out anything. Yeah.
Tickling in the nose hairs, throbbing at the temples, pulsing at the ears,
Great.
weight on the sit bones,
Yeah.
sharp in the ankles.
Yeah, great. What else? What do people feel?
Relaxed with a touch of heat fatigue.
What's that?
Relaxed with a touch of heat fatigue.
Okay, relaxed. So relax would be more of an emotion. It's very subtle. See? So what would be underlying, what would be a physical sensation to relaxed? What's that?
Comfortable?
Comfortable would be more of interpretation, right? So for example, maybe slow breath. Not much muscle tension. What else? What did you feel physically? Yeah.
It was tearing up.
What's that?
What came good? It was tearing.
Tearing. Yeah. So, what was the sensation of tearing? Was it? Can we go deeper into that and say that a slight muscle tension in the eyes and the development of liquid tear ducts. Yeah, so, yeah.
A tightness or heat. And then my mind wanted to call it something,
Yeah, right.
you know, and then I just thought, well, what was it?
Yeah.
And if you tried to remove the words,
Yeah.
all I could tell you it's like a
Tightness is it's a beautiful thing to start playing with the distinction. Not one is not better than the other. I mean, it's important to realize what's happening emotionally and what's happening physically. But oftentimes when I get when I'm getting stuck in meditation or when I get dullness, I come back to the physicality of the body. I always come back to the physicality of the body. It's also incredibly useful in arguing or reactivity, is you come back to the physicalness of the body. I was in a fight with a girlfriend years ago, and we both paused for a minute, and we just we both did unspoken to each other. We both were doing the same practice of coming back into the physicality of the body. And I was thinking, oh, what's happening in my body right now? And it turns out she was doing the same thing. And what I found was really interesting is as I was having anger, I was having all of this feeling of rushing energy coming up my body and then out my arms. And I was just, so then I could step back and watch that, right? So it's a beautiful practice for learning to feel, is to be able to distinguish the physical sensation from the emotional overlay we put onto that physical sensation, right? So I have this rush of prana moving up my body, and then it gets interpreted to me as anger. Right? So I propose that this is a way out of dullness, is to start feeling either what's happening emotionally, feeling relief of the coolness of the air conditioner, or what's happening physically, is a way to move ourselves into engagement with the world. And that engagement takes dullness out, right? Because what is dullness? It's a kind of disengagement. It's just a dull, there's this look of like, you know, there's this total like disengagement with the world. So then, lazy doubt, so doubt, right? So the fourth one that Nagarjuna proposes is doubt. And the one positive of that we can look at is to be critical but curious, right? Because Buddhism is all about doubt, but it's not about doubt in terms of like, oh, that's bullshit, I don't believe in that. You know, it's doubt like, I don't know about that. What are some of the problems with that position? What are some of the supports for that position? It's like really kind of debating it out. So some kind of beautiful mix of criticalness and curiosity. Open-minded criticism, open-minded criticalness is perhaps a positive way of looking at that. And then attachment. We'll come back to that last. That's the last thing we're going to touch on, is the positive aspect of renunciation. Another way of looking at attachment in terms of renunciation. So Patanjali, we have the two things, the two important things are renunciation and practice. Right? For Nagarjuna, we have the 5 things to avoid, right? And then Teresa, we get into what's called the Teresan triad among Teresan scholars. So the Teresan triad, the 3 core foundations of all of St. Teresa's work, falls into three main things. And the first one is love, which she often also refers to as generosity, which we could have a whole class about the correlation between those two. The second one is humility, and then the third one is renunciation. These are like the 3 pillars that she bases the entire spiritual life on, and what she taught to her nuns as being the nuns and the monks that were under her, as being the core to a successful spiritual life. She says this in the Way of Perfection. The first of these is love for one another. The second is detachment from all created things. And the third is true humility. So, so we can just see, it's a thin line, but we can see how renunciation runs through all of these 3 things. Now, when we're talking about renunciation, we're talking about renouncing, right? Usually renouncing desire, renouncing attachment. So it's important at this point to say, are all desires the same? If we're talking about renouncing attachment, does it mean to be attached to things is negative? What do you think? Why not? What can we be attached to that's not negative?
It's a tricky semantical thing. I wouldn't phrase it that way, but one can have desire to do good, to be compassionate, to be loving, to progress spiritually, to be moral, and so on and so on.
Okay, yeah. So those nobody would say that those are negative things that we should renounce, right? What are some things that we probably should renounce? First of all, has anybody in here renounced something that they want to share? Yeah, Jordan.
Alcohol.
Alcohol, right, okay. So that's a very specific thing, like I'm going to give up alcohol. The first thing I ever renounced, like really renounced, was donuts. Right? And because I used to love donuts. And I was sitting in Duncan Donuts, and my last name being Duncan, I felt like, you know, I was in good company. And I was looking around at all of the people in the donut shop, and they were all like 50-year-old chain-smoking guys that were pissed off about something. You know, and they were all talking. It was like a group of guys getting together for morning, drinking coffee and eating donuts. And I'm, you know, at this point I was 19 or 20 years old, you know, and I'm like, wow, this donut is putting me on the fast track to these guys. Like, that's just what it felt in that moment, you know? So I decided, and I really, you got to understand, I really did love donuts. So I decided in that moment, I'm never going to eat another donut for the rest of my life. That's it, you know? Why? Not because I moved on to other things like cake and stuff. So it wasn't like a health thing. It was a symbolic gesture, right? It was a symbolic gesture that I'm never gonna, and I never have. And it's hard because I used to work in an office, and that's all we had for meetings. It was like donuts, you know. Have a donut. It's like, no, I'm all right. But so you know, that's like it's a symbolic representation, renouncing something. What else? Anybody has renounced anything?
Having children.
Yeah. All right. Great. Hector's renounced having children. What else? Anything else? I don't quite know where to go with that. Sorry. No, it's great.
I'll take it back up if you want.
No. It's perfect. Well, is there a specific reason? I mean, because there's.
It was the first thing I remembered.
Yeah.
Actively choosing.
Okay, right.
For the rest of my life, not needing to do that, like defining my love for a new human creature and their development had zero to do with Hector's sperm or Hector's DNA.
Yeah.
But if I wanted mine to grow,
it
need not be mine.
Yeah.
So I better take care of other kids.
Yeah, so it was a very conscious decision. That's a lifestyle choice decision. Yeah. Yeah, Larry. Pornography, yeah, and that's a beautiful one, especially in this day and age. And actually, I'm teaching quite a bit, and I have in the past on pornography, because with the internet, I mean, back when I was a kid, it was like Playboy, you know, and then we had like one for the whole neighborhood, and we kept it in a tree. And so, you know, nobody took it home. Like, you just knew where the Playboy was, you know. And that, you know, like, that was what we did, and that's what I grew up with one Playboy in the tree, you know. And but now with internet pornography, right? It's incredible what young kids can have access to, and there's amazing studies on what that does to the mind. Pornography is designed to be addictive. And pornography on the internet is designed to create an addictive response with dopamine and all this stuff, which we won't talk about tonight. But that's an important one to consider. I'll just throw this out there. One thing that they're discovering is that erectile dysfunction goes hand in hand with internet pornography, and there's a whole reason why that comes up, and we can get into that sometime. So what Larry didn't say is sexual ecstasy, right? he said pornography, or and people that I talked to about this, where it's not a giving up, because it's exciting to see human beings have sex. Like, nobody would deny that that's not exciting. I mean, maybe for all of us that isn't exciting, but it turns out for 99% of the population that's exciting. That's seen, because what happens in the moment of sex, you're having extraordinarily, a feeling of extraordinary bliss. So if we just remove all of the social context, what we're getting excited by is watching people experience bliss. It seems pretty normal, right? I mean, it seems pretty beautiful. Like, oh, hey, let's go watch people be happy. Like, you're right, in and of itself, that there doesn't seem to be a problem there. Like, for example, I was just waiting at the airport, and the airport is such a fun place to wait because you watch people coming together, and everybody's hugging you. You just feel happy, right? And we could say that that's almost a kind of pornography, right? Like, you watching people be happy together. So then the next question comes, the next question that arises is, does it work? Does it work? Does it function to make you happy? And then this is a big topic. I shouldn't have gone on that tangent, but yeah.
Giving up eating animal food 45 years ago, I'm just sorry, just like you would do when you were a child, calling you real fat, and it ever stays in your mind, right?
Yeah.
The fact that I didn't eat before 45 years ago also is constant.
So you gave up eating animals
45 years ago.
Yeah, and then so you're saying all those moments before that.
Before, like I was 19 or 20
Yeah.
like how come not before that?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
I also had, and we'll move on in a second, but I had another specific moment of renunciation, which is I used to, like most kids, I used to stamp on insects, and I was stamping on an anthill when I was like 9 or something. And all of a sudden, the terror of what I was doing hit me for the first time. And I renounced stamping on anthills. Yeah. So these things. So we can get a sense. Now, we can start to feel that there's two different types of desires, right? There's a desire, what you mentioned, for doing good and stuff like that. And then there's a desire for alcohol, desire for pornography. There's a desire for donuts, right? So how do we differentiate between these two desires? Because our language is tricky. Luckily for us, it's not. We have it defined better in other languages. But how would you say to differentiate between these two desires? Because it's a crucial question. Because if we're talking about renunciation, renouncing attachment, we need to be very clear about what kind of attachment we're talking about. Say that now.
Letting go of this thing, suffering.
So can we say, so you said suffering.
Yeah,
So
things that make you suffer.
Attachment that brings suffering. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying to differentiate the line is maybe letting go of the suffering things of this world.
Yeah. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
It's how you started this whole evening now. Does it move you towards?
Yeah. Does it move you closer? Did you say God or yeah? John.
Lately, I've been thinking about it as renouncing of self-interest. Maybe the lower self-interest.
Yeah.
Meaning, alcohol is very joyful for me.
Yeah.
Or getting angry
Yeah.
is a really big high sometimes.
Yeah.
So, but if I follow the line, it only goes down.
Yeah.
Of those things.
Yeah. So Jorm said, I'm just repeating for the tape too. Jorm said that alcohol is pleasurable and getting angry is pleasurable. Who does not feel some rush of pleasure when they're justified in their anger, right?
Is it pleasure or is it a release?
It could be something, some combination of that. Yeah, maybe. I just got mad, and it was really funny because Anne was witnessing me, And she said, like, my whole face turned. I was really mad at somebody, and I've been mad at them for years, you know? And finally, I just couldn't hold back anymore. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I'm not going to name names. But I, like, suddenly, you know, the anger came up, and, like, all consciousness left, you know? And I was like, I'm going to say something. Because this person was really, like, constantly crossing the boundaries, you know, constantly. And so it's that rush of anger. And then I went, and Anne's like, she's like trying to stop me. She's like, don't do it. And I can like hear this echo. Turn back now. You know, and luckily I didn't get angry at them, but I think I was just, I don't know. I was able to extract myself enough from them before I lost it. And then what I realized is, like, I was just out of my mind a moment ago. You know, there was a loss of consciousness, right? And that we can see that with certain addictive patterns, right? There's a loss of consciousness. So there's that kind of desire, there's that kind of attachment where it brings us out of clarity. And then there's attachment that brings us into greater clarity. So let's look at two things. Let's first look at D.H. Lawrence, because he's got, in Lady Chatterley's Lovers, he's got a beautiful definition, I think, between what we're talking about. He says, man has little needs and deeper needs. So that's how he's defining those two. There's a little need, which is like the need for anger, the need for alcohol, the need for pornography. It's a little need. And then man has deeper needs. We fall into the mistake of living from our little needs till we have almost lost our deeper needs in a sort of madness. And Rilke talks about this too, right? The atrophy of the senses that can perceive God. So D.H. Lawrence says, man has little needs and deeper needs. We fall into the mistake of living from our little needs till we have almost lost our deeper needs in a sort of madness. Let us prepare now for the death of our present little life and reemergence in a bigger life in touch with the moving cosmos. Kebate. It's beautiful, right? That's let us prepare now for the death of our present little life and reemergence in a bigger life in touch with the moving cosmos. And what I find particularly amazing about this moment in this room with all of us is we are all in in some kind of engagement right now, or you wouldn't be here, with the death of your little life. You see what I mean? All of us in some way, the reason we're here is because we're on a cusp. We're engaged in the death of a little life and on the cusp of a re-emergence with the bigger life, in touch with the moving cosmos. So my favorite definition of this distinction, which I often talk about, is found in the Katha Upanishads. And they talk about it as, they have two words for it in Sanskrit, which is Shreya and Preya. So Preya is the little life, and Shreya is the bigger life, right? And they say both Shreya and Preya, which is translated here as good and pleasant. So good would be the bigger life, right? What is good, and the little life would be pleasant, just the meagerly pleasures. They say in the text, both good and pleasant present themselves to a man or a woman. The calm soul examines them well and discriminates. He or she prefers the good to the pleasant, but the fool chooses the pleasant out of greed and avarice. So the calm soul examines them well and discriminates, which just means having a slightly bigger time frame, right? Oh, because nobody in here would deny that getting drunk is not fun. You see what I mean? It's pleasure. There is a pleasure in there. But maybe I would have some people. But the reason we engage in alcohol is because there's some pleasure, right? Can we say that? But what's that? Pot is better. The reason we engage in pot is because it is pleasure, right? But if we expand it a little bit, what are the gremlins that are attached onto that in the long run? Are there negative things that are attached onto that? Is there a negative impact on that in the long run? And so we're just, the wise The wise one examines them well and discriminates, right? What will this look like in a day from now? What will this look like in a week from now? I'm very sensitive to television. I know some people aren't, but I've watched my own mind. If I engage in 30 minutes of television, I will eliminate my capacity for joy for at least 24 hours. I've watched it very closely, and I suggest that you could do some experiments and look at it. It's hard because there's a slight time delay. But I believe, for me, a little bit of television eliminates my capacity for beauty for a period of time after that.
Regardless of what you're watching.
Totally regardless. It has to do with the quickness of the editing cuts, with the way the music is edited in, which is the way laugh tracks, even PBS, stuff like that. Granted, if some things are worse than others, but for me personally, I immediately eliminate. So is that 30 minutes of pleasure worth the next 24 hours of a loss of joy? Because we turn on TV because it's pleasurable. We turn on TV because maybe we're lonely. Does it work? In the long run, do we feel less lonely with the TV? So if we just look, for example, with loneliness in television, to watch TV because you're lonely is not a bad thing, right? I'm trying to eliminate guilt from the equation. I'm just saying, then ask yourself, does it work? When I turn off the TV, do I feel less lonely? And those are the kind of tools that we need to be able to discriminate the little needs from the big needs, the little mind from the big mind, Shreya from Preya. Did you have something to say there? Okay.
I had a question about that.
Oh yeah.
When you say TV, is it anything on a screen?
Well,
is it like movies in general, or?
Partially this is my own editing process because I love movies. So maybe I've suppressed that that's also true of movies. But what I found with the difference between television and movies, for example, is that there's an intentionality with movies that there's not often with television. I find when I turn if I turn on television in a hotel room, I'll tend to stream through channels quicker, and the stories are really quick, and things just move quicker, and the mind is much more distracted, as opposed to a movie. I'm watching one whole thing all the way through. So for me, I felt that doesn't happen as much with movies, but it happens, for example, with web surfing or something like that. Well, that's another thing. We'll let it go like that. So, both the good and pleasant present themselves to a person. The calm soul examines them well and discriminates. They prefer the good to the pleasant, but the fool chooses the pleasant out of greed and avarice. For me, it's a very interesting and useful way to try to distinguish these two different kinds of pleasure. Because what we are talking about is how to distinguish between pleasure that in the long run will cause more pain and pleasure that in the long run will diminish pain. Or somebody said pleasure that creates more clarity in the world versus pleasure that creates confusion in the world. So, let's take a quick little break here. Oh, we ended 9, don't we?
It's up to you. There's nothing after this.
I know one person could we take a break and come back for 20 minutes? If you have to leave, you can leave now, and we'll put this up online or something like that. So let's take a little break, just a quick 5-minute break. Have a couple cherries and then come back in. Oh, here are the cherries. So there's more there. Okay. If anybody has any questions or anything they wanted to talk about, I'll just be up here. Oh, but maybe since you have to go, we should talk. Okay.